Venture is one of, if not the most underrated hero at the moment, being brought out in the Faceit League a few weeks back, to now having the Korean show up and bring out the Venture in the recent Dallas Major. In fact, before the Dallas Major, I made a video on my second channel talking about why Venture is so bloody strong, but unfortunately, people still haven't caught on. In decently high level scrims, people are still playing the boring ass Tracer Sojourn meta, and it seems like people are too scared to play to their own strengths and to experiment with different heroes, instead choosing to default to the status quo. This video is going to be structured into 3 parts. Firstly, going over why Venture is so powerful through the lens of the Crazy Raccoons and Falcons final. Secondly, why Venture isn't always played and their biggest counters. And last but certainly not least, how all of this applies to you, either if you just play ranked, or if you play in a team environment. Obviously, this is going to be timestamped, so you can skip to the bits you're interested in. The first and arguably most important thing to mention with Venture is their Tracer Denial. You'll see pretty much every pro level Venture do this consistently, and it works like a charm on maps like Oasis or Midtown. Here, you can see Stalker straight up deny Heesang taking a flank and forces his recall at basically no expense to himself, winning the duel. Worth noting that when I say winning the duel, I'm not saying Venture kills the Tracer, but just forcing out a disproportionate amount of resources. Recall is a 13-second cooldown. If you force that out and only use Dual Dash, even if you don't kill the Tracer, that's a win in my books. Anyways, continuing with the finals game, on the next round of Oasis, Raccoons play Hog, which, if you want to see me analyze, drop a follow on my TikTok to stay tuned. Unfortunately, Hog is only played for a single round, so it's just not enough to make a full video on. On New Junk City, during the final fight, Jumbin gets caught between the 2 angles that Falcons have, between the Genji and the Lucio, and between the Venture and the Mauga. As a result, Jumbin gets caught between the crossfire and dies, but after, you get a pretty nice POV of Stalker forcing out both the Tracer and the Genji before going on to the Kiriko. At the beginning of the very next point, Stalker forces out the Tracer yet again, but just with Tectonic Shock instead. Interestingly, at the end of the second flashpoint, Stalker ignores marking the Tracer, but that's just because he needs to touch. Because of this, you can see how much freedom Lip has on the Tracer, basically dancing around in the Lucio Kiriko backline. However, Stalker comes just in time, not just to deny, but straight up kill the Tracer. There's plenty more examples of Tracer denial back in my initial video, of which you're seeing an example of in the background. The reason why this matchup is so powerful is that 2 things either happen. The Tracer either dies, as you just saw in the case of Lip, or the Tracer is forced to stack main because it's too risky to take an angle without having recall. I'll play an example from my initial video, which pretty clearly shows this.
Position Naga's playing now from this sort of hooker area.
During this dive, either Pac is going to have to restage with Hattori, which is going to burn more time off the clock, or he's going to have to stack main on Hattori and their dive's going to be a bit scuffed.
A little bit.
Yeah, look how stacked Pac is, you know? He's just getting no value. For those who are extra keen, you'll also recognize that this perfectly aligns with my dive guide, where I talked a lot about forcing out flankers first before going for backline. And it's the exact same thing here, just a Venture forcing out a Tracer before diving the backline. Denying Tracer also has an implication for Venture themselves, in that they're able to do what I coined close range collapses. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Venture one-shot combo, but denying Tracer means that the Venture has a lot more freedom to be able to pull this combo off, without having to worry about getting punished by a Tracer. You can perfectly see this in the very first fight in this video. Stalker straight up denies Heesang on the Tracer and immediately collapses on the backline with his combo. The last fight on the second flashpoint, Falcons decide to beat rush, meaning Stalker doesn't need to deny the Tracer, and collapses straight onto the enemy Lucio, and finishes off Heesang, who, let's be real, who uses a pretty desperate Dragon Blade to try and swing the fight back. On the third flashpoint, Stalker and Proper collapse onto Chorong again, and the reason this time is just because Chorong is in open space. Comparably, you can see Lip is playing cover quite well by the boxes, assuming that his team is just gonna bait Falcons in. Because this flashpoint is basically just open space, I assume Raccoons was just playing slow to bait Falcons to walk into this open kill box, but funnily enough, Chorong was in Falcons kill box. In the last fight on this third point, I think Stalker actually makes a mistake here. He chooses to ignore the Tracer playing left side, which actually ends up in Chio getting picked off. He does get a really nice collapse kill onto Heesang's Echo though. Ideally, in this fight, I would have liked to see the Lucio Venture flush out the Tracer, then Stalker can go for his collapse play onto the Echo, and hopefully, Chio would have lived here. I assume Stalker just goes straight for backline out of panic, due to how close the point was to capping. The last thing I want to go over with Venture is their ability to restage, or what I like to call, low risk restaging. You can see it here, where Stalker actually gets forced out by the Tracer Echo, but it's fine because he just borrows away. This get out of jail free card isn't new to Overwatch, of course. Reaper is probably the most akin to this with his Wraith form, but the difference between Reaper and Venture is that at a 10 to 15 meter distance, Venture is a much more capable duelist and denier, as we've already established. Tying these 3 points together holistically, I want to go over this fight by Space Station against Twisted Minds. Here, Psycho does some Tracer denial, covering the first points. He then restages at a low risk with his Burrow, covering that third point, and then collapses onto the Sojourn in a close range area, covering that second point. Notice how UB plays, by the way. UB is basically stacked with his Malga, but he would love to be playing right behind Landon, shooting him from the back. But because Psycho had wasted his time earlier and denied him the space, UB is forced to stack a main with his Malga and gets limited value. Honestly, he might as well be playing Farah, but hey, that's for another video. Let me know if you'd like to see that, by the way. Before I continue, just gonna quickly plug my coaching. Check it out down below, you won't regret it. So, we've covered the 3 key things that makes Venture a top 5 DPS at the moment. But why aren't they any higher? Why isn't Venture played everywhere? The first and most obvious thing is actually the map. If you actually look back at that Falcons match, Stalker swaps off the Venture to go Tracer because this point of New Junk City is super open. The sightlines are also very long, which obviously don't suit Venture's limited range, and the enclosed spaces on the points, like underneath the high ground, don't matter much because nobody really plays them. Another example where you have this dichotomy is Icon Wall's second point defense, where at the very beginning, you have great sightlines to deny flanking Tracers. But as soon as second point starts to open up, you have a very open, long sightline across the bridge and across the high ground too. It's not completely unplayable because you can play this defensively inside the castle, but still, it's not ideal. In terms of hero counters, you obviously have the aerial heroes like Echo and especially Farah, who's been recently picking up steam, but honestly, I don't think the heroes affect Venture as much as the map does. On maps like Pariso, of course everybody plays Dive. Venture isn't played on Pariso because they're necessarily bad against Dive, but because Pariso first point is just open space. How the fuck do you traverse this on Venture? It's a bit easier on defense because again, you can play the enclosed spaces, but on attack, it's basically impossible. Maps where Venture is forced to use their mobility cooldowns just to even reach a target and start dealing damage, and maps that make it significantly easier to force out a Venture due to their sightlines is what tends to be the defining factor of a Venture's play. Pariso is a great example and so is Esperanza. It's so easy to force out a Tracer if you're playing a map like Oasis Gardens, but if you're on Esperanza first fight, look how open the side of the bot is, and how you're forced to drill dash just to reach the enemy high grounds. Especially when we start considering Sojourn, Cassidy and Tracer, who are staple meta picks because they can work on most maps, it's no wonder that those 3 heroes maintain the status quo. And that leads me on to the final takeaways from this video. If you're a ranked player watching this, which, let's be real, is most of you, the biggest takeaway is to be way more conscious about where and who you duel. Everyone already knows about the Venture one-shot, but people still haven't caught on about how good Venture is at denying flankers. Next time, don't just immediately dive the Ana or Baptiste. Purposefully scout and find their Tracer, and once you force a recall, then you can dive to your heart's content. Remember, the strength of Venture's dueling comes from where they're playing. Next time you're in Midtown, play in this enclosed room on defense, where it's very easy to force out Tracers. Next time you're on Shambali, play in this mega room. Next time you're on route, control the narrow pathway to the high grounds. Believe it or not, this is still cutting edge macro, because even top 500 players and teams have not caught on to the potential value that Venture can bring. And that leads me on to teams. I recently had a coachee who described to me how they were forced into Tracer because their team didn't want to play Venture without even giving a reason to why. Don't be afraid to experiment and try different heroes as long as there's some fair reasoning behind it. My own team, Quick Academy, have been playing a specific style of venture comp that suits to our strengths, and we've been giving teams like Entitled, who are top 3 in the open division of Face It League, and Team Gambit and 5 Stars, who are 6th and 2nd place respectively in the Expert division, a run for their money. Hopefully this kinda goes to show how conforming to meta can actually be counterproductive. Honestly, I thought Chris talking about the downsides to being meta slaves and constantly mirroring the same comps was enough to influence at least Western teams in playing to their own strengths rather than playing to the status quo, but I was wrong. Anyways, that's it for the video. If you'd like a similar video but with Farah, do be sure to let me know down below, and my exams are almost over, so I'll be back to uploading regularly soon. As always, if this video helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time.